My name is Todd Miranda. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use a template to customize the way that a validation binding error is displayed in WPF. So let's begin in Microsoft Visual Studio 2008, and we'll choose File, New Project, and we're going to create a WPF application project, and we'll name it accordingly, and choose OK. So this is going to give us the default template for a WPF application. And let's go ahead, and the first thing we need to do is just do a little bit of plumbing. So we're going to do a little bit of groundwork. We're going to go and add to our project a class, and this class is going to be used to create some data that will then be able to bind into our application. So let's just create a child class, and we'll create a couple of properties. Maybe this is a string, and we'll call this name. And then we'll create another property, and this will be an int. We'll call it age, and that'll work. And let's right click. We'll do organize usings and remove unused usings to get rid of anything that we wouldn't use. Alright, so there's our child class. Now let's go into our code behind for our window. And let's just, again, we're going to do a little bit of plumbing here. We know that we need to create a list of these objects that we just created. So we're going to create a list, and this is going to be of type child. And we'll call this children. It says equals new list child. And then let's go over to our XAML. We'll do a loaded event, perhaps. And maybe when the window loads, we want to go ahead and load up our data. So we'll do children.add, we'll do new child, and then scroll up a little bit so we can see what we're doing. And we'll come in here and do name equals, and let's just say maybe we've got a Johnny, age equals, we'll say 21, and then actually, why don't we just copy and paste? I'm all about copying and pasting. So maybe here we've got a Susie, and she might be 23, and then maybe we've got a Billy, and Billy's 19. Okay, so we'll do that, and then we'll bind it into our UI once we build our UI. But that gets a little bit of our plumbing work done for us. So now let's go into our XAML, and we'll go ahead and build our UI. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change our default grid to a stack panel. And likewise, we'll come down here and end our stack panel. All right, and we're going to give our stack panel a name because we'll set the data context directly onto our stack panel. So we'll do x.name equals, and let's call this, maybe we'll call this panel children, and then within our stack panel, let's do a list box, and then in our list box, maybe we'll set the height for our list box to say 100, our width to 120, and then we're going to do an items source equals, now we're going to do a binding, and what that means is it's going to traverse the tree and find the first element that has a data context, and that'll happen to be our stack panel in this case. So we'll set it will be bound to the data context that is in our stack panel. So our item source is that, and then we're going to use this as the selector for the items we want to edit in our little editor form. So we'll do is synchronized with current item equals true to allow that synchronization. And then let's come down here in our list box, and we want to do an item template for the items that are going to be bound in our list box. So we'll do listbox dot item template, and this item template is a data template, and the data template will be let's do a stack panel. We'll just do something really simple. So we're going to do an orientation equals horizontal, and then we'll come into our stack panel and we'll have some text blocks. So let's do a text block with text, and then we'll do a binding inside that text block. Binding path equals, and let's go ahead and do name, I guess. Alright, so there's one text block. Let's throw a couple others in here. This middle text block will just be some text. We'll use this to store a comma and a space to do a separator. And then our last binding will be age. So now these are the properties, obviously, from the child class that we created just a few moments ago. And that'll make up our data template for the items that we're going to bind into our list box. So fairly straightforward there. After our list box, still within our stack panel, let's just go ahead and do a grid. So we're going to create a grid. And in our grid, we're going to have, let's say we're going to have maybe a couple of columns. So we'll do grid.column definitions, and we'll come in here and do a column definition, and then we'll copy and paste that for another column definition. We'll scroll down a little bit. And let's do the same thing for row definitions. So maybe we've got, let's see, row definitions, and I know we're going to need one row definition, and then another row definition. All right. So let's go ahead and with our two row definitions, our two column definitions, let's go ahead and add some elements. So let's see, we'll have a text block, and that text block will have a text that perhaps says name, colon, and it's going to be in the first row and first column, so we're not going to specify any column and row because that's the default, is the first column and first row. All right, so then we're going to have a text box that follows that, and its text will be bound. So we're going to do a binding here, and we'll say path equals name, and then we'll do that. And this is because this is directly within our stack panel still, so the data context will apply to this text box as well. And let's go ahead and specify that this is going to be in grid.column1, which is the second column. We want it to be in the first row, so again, we don't necessarily have to specify the row because the first row is the default. And then let's do another text block. Text equals, and this will be age. And this time we do want to do grid.row equals 1 to put it in the second row, but the column is going to be the first column. So since that's the default, we don't have to specify the column. And then we'll do text box, text equals, do another binding, path equals age. And here we do need to specify that we want this to be in grid.column equals 1 and grid.row equals 1. All right. So that gets a name and text box, an age and text box, and we're binding the name and age into our text boxes. All right. So let's take a look at that. Let's go to our code behind, and we're going to here go ahead and bind our panel children dot data context equals children. All right, so that binds our list that we created to our panel. Let's run this and see if we have any errors and see if it works the way we intend. All right, yep, that looks pretty good. That looks great. Okay, so now we've got our standard UI. We see that we've got our list box, and we could select the list box, select the item in the list box, and it would show up in our text boxes. So now we need to add some validation. So we're in the process of our application here where we would want to add some validation for our age text box, not the text block up there but right here we'd want to add some validation. So let's change this just a little, and we're going to take the text out of attribute syntax, and we're going to move it to element syntax. So text block dot text, not text alignment, but text. All right. And then we want to specify the text to be a binding, and the path for the binding is age. And then right here we're going to do binding dot validation rules, and we're going to come in and we're going to specify a validation rule here. Now, you know, we actually have an exception validation rule. We kind of get that by default. So why don't we go ahead and throw that in there? We'll throw an exception validation rule in there, and that'll mean that we will catch the exceptions that are thrown, perhaps if somebody enters maybe string values into our text box. So like ABCD, those obviously can't be converted to an int, so we would get an exception when it tries to do that conversion. So we'll catch the exception validation rule, and then let's add a custom validation rule as well. And also notice while I'm here that I did text block.text. Let's just go ahead and change that because it should be text box.text. Typing too fast. So let's go in and let's do the project. We're going to do add a class. Let's add a class file. We'll call this age validation. Alright, so our age validation is going to inherit from validation rule. Alright, and since we don't have that using statement that we need, we're going to right click on validation rule, do resolve, and include that using statement because we've got that capability in C#. And then let's build our validation rule. So we're going to right click on our validation rule and do implement abstract class. Just kind of a shortcut for us to do that for us. Notice that the only thing we need to have to implement when we do our custom validation is the validate method. So that's pretty easy. Not a whole lot of work that we have to do there. Let's go in here. We'll just do something real quick. We'll do int age. We'll do if int 32 dot try parse value dot toString, just to kind of make this easy on ourselves. We'll do out age, and let's say if that, then we want to come in here and say if age is greater than or equal to 18. So maybe our validator, we want to make sure that the people that are in here are at least 18 years of age. And if they are, we'll do return new validation result. And is valid, yes, we'll turn true. And then we'll do null for our context. So otherwise, if we pass all the way through our ifs here, then let's just do return new validation result. This is obviously going to be false, and let's see, we'll just say value. It's not really good to write a validator that's too aware of the property that you're going to be using it for. So instead of using age, we'll use value. So value must be greater than or equal to 18. And we could actually use this text value if we wanted to in the validation. If we get a validation error, we could do something like, perhaps we could use that text in a some kind of a tooltip or something that shows up on our validated value. Okay, so there's our validation rule. There's our custom validation rule. Pretty straightforward. Bottom line is we're going to override the validate, and then we need to return a validation result, either true or false. So again, we'll right click on our usings, do organize usings, and remove the ones that we're not using. And do save. So there's our validation. So now let's go back to our XAML, and first thing I guess we need to do is come up here to our namespaces and create a namespace alias, and we'll just do that local. And we're going to specify that we want to use this assembly since that's where our class is located. And then we'll come down here and we'll do local : age validation. So now we've got one of the validation rules that come with that we get free. We get that free, and then we also have a custom validation here as well. All right, so now let's execute this application again. Make sure we're on the right track. All right, so now if Johnny is 3 instead of 21, notice we get a little red border around our text box, and that's an indicator that there was an error in validation. So now we see that we've got some kind of visual indicator of the error. But maybe this is not exactly what we want. Maybe we want something more dramatic. Maybe we want to really customize and really really make the error stand out a little bit. So we can do that by creating a control template that we'll use for the validator template, and then we have to use a special adorner type of element that we can use for that, and we'll see exactly how that works. Let's go right up here to our window, and let's do window.resources. All right, and we're going to come in here. We're going to create a control template. So let's be a control template, and since it's up in our resources, we need to give it a key. We'll call this, let's say, valid. Let's do custom validator template. All right, that's probably not the best thing that we could call it, but for demonstration purposes, I think that'll work just fine. All right, so let's see what our template might look like. So let's say that we want a border. All right, so we like the red border, but we maybe want it to stand out a little bit more. So let's say that our control template is going to start with a border, and let's say that border brush is equal to red. We'll do that. Let's see, border thickness. Let's just take that up to something like 3, something that'll really stand out. And then let's do, maybe we'll do corner radius is 4. All right, to give us a little bit of a corner radius on our border. All right, so that's good for our border, I think. And then within the border, we want the text box to appear. So wherever we want the element that is being validated to appear, we're going to use a placeholder, but it's a special type of placeholder. We're going to use the adorned element placeholder. All right, so there we go. Wherever we have this adorned element placeholder, our element that's being validated will appear. So we're going to have our text box, or whatever type of other element we would use this validator on. In this case, it is the text box, and it would appear inside this border. Now we could take this a step further, and we could maybe in our control template, we'll do a stack panel. Let's do an orientation of horizontal, and then let's see, maybe in our stack panel we'd have our border. Oops, let's try that. And then next, after our border, would be a text block. Let's do text equals, we'll do asterisk. All right, so maybe an asterisk shows up after that. We could use a path here. We could, use whatever character we want. When you're doing a web application development, a lot of times you'll see an asterisk show up that indicates either it's a required field or indicates there was some kind of an error. We could have an image instead of this text block. That would be interesting to do an image, so that would work. Let's see. We'll do our foreground red, and think that'll be good. All right, so we've got a border, and then we've got the little asterisk that shows up, and the text box is going to show up inside of our border. So now let's go down. We called this custom validator template. Let's go down to our age validation for our text box. And in our text box, we want to do this inside the element that we're validating. We're going to do validation.error template. Oops, not validation adorner site dot error template equals, and here we'll have static resource, specify the name of our static resource, and there we go. There's our error template specified for our text box. So let's now run this with our new custom error template. And let's see what happens when we change our binding to something that is invalid. All right, so notice we've got our box pushed real far over here to the right, so we can't see our asterisk. But notice how we have our thicker border, and we've got our nice corner radius on that, and it's surrounding our text box. I'll tell you what we could do real quick, as opposed to adding margins and things like that in. We'll just kind of cheat, take the easy way out, and we'll put our asterisk first, and then run this. So here we can see We got our asterisk, we got our border, and we could do anything as elaborate as we wanted to inside that control template, obviously, because once we get inside the control template, we're just back to using templates like we've done before if you've done any kind of work with control templates at all. So you could make that as elaborate as you wanted to. In this case, we see that we've just got a good little indicator. It's a lot stronger than the default indicator is for our custom validator, and quite easy to do. Simply create the control template, and on the element that you've got the binding validation, just specify the error template and point to the custom template that you created. So pretty straightforward to modify the way that our validation errors are displayed, and there's some really interesting things that you can do with those control templates on the validation to give you some really rich indicators of validation exceptions.